No, that's the worst. That is the worst.
Where'd you go?
Probably and hopefully he didn't know yet. But I know that somebody, I hope that he won't care.
If he's not here.
If he's not here and I'm doing my job, he's not care, yes. But if he's here and he didn't see me, that's the problem. So he wasn't here and I'm getting my job, that's
I
fine.
was so busy writing.
Okay, does this look good? Does this look good?
Well, we have Amna's slides, so it's mostly per person that we need to see.
And then I'm sure that she has,
What's that?
Be sure that
you could be heard perfectly, Chris, where the computer was standing, but everyone else was not so good, so I think it would be best if we're close to Amna as close as possible.
Okay.
Okay.
There you go. Also, for you CS people, Friday night, we're doing the social gathering for the new VT grad recruits. So please come out. I'll be cooking and we'll have good food and drinks. I haven't, if you tell me what to cook and I'll cook it. But there'll be options, vegetarian, vegan, the whole, what do you mean, a lot? A lot of what? If you followed any of the other emails I've sent about the food options I've cooked before, I will keep them, so, to the best of my knowledge.
What about lasagna?
I do love lasagna. I do love lasagna.
You don't have to make vegetarian.
Vegetarian lasagna is very good.
It's good? I never tried it. So you can take
You can use eggplant or zucchini as the noodle. Some people use,
Is that vegetarian or is that vegan at that point?
Okay.
No, he can add cheese, right?
depends on the cheese more than the noodle.
Okay.
Yes, I know that.
I do not want to eat
So
vegan
red,
lasagna.
he's red.
Vegan's a little more difficult,
More than
the cheese part, but
What did he do?
Yeah, is there any vegan cheese?
So what?
there is, it's not cheap. But
I never seen it in
if I would, oh, it's there.
He
In
Which,
Kroger?
which Kroger do you shop at?
take your news and.
Sometimes Southman, but more often you see.
The University Mall,
That's red.
the very left wall,
Okay, when I watch movies,
all the way to the back in the refrigerator, top shelf,
okay.
there's 4 options. But for
I wonder how
a
does it
vegan,
taste with vegan
How is
cheese?
It's
And he has-
heavily flavored, but with a vegan lasagna, I would go more pesto than I would go cheese.
It's an accusation, right?
Then you go over put too much flavor into it.
Everything else.
So what?
I come from
Why do you have to go with
cheese,
it?
tomato, no meat in mine.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know there was meat in lasagna until recently. That is weird. My favorite lasagna though is spinach lasagna.
Cream base.
So which one, the fruit is the one with
A slight bit of tomato, just to
they're having like.
not make it too, taste too creamy.
My favorite lasagna is the Alfredo. Spinach Alfredo.
No, actually, I don't attend all this stuff. Depends on. I think it's. He said it today, yes, as well. Did you drop it? I mean, did you tell him just put me on the ground?
So, oh, good.
Okay, just a moment. He's back from where he from, so he must have known.
Did you ask him to do something?
No. I met him on the side. No, on the,
He was listening.
yeah, on the opposite. You don't know. So how do you do it?
I don't know.
You're very interesting. You know that?
What was the title again?
You're like, it has to be at 5:30, and then now you're like, let's start. So there you go.
Okay. Good evening. My name is Amna Rafiq, and I will be leading the discussion today on the topic of organizational development. I would like for us to have an interactive and collaborative discussion, so any questions are welcome in the middle of the presentation. Any thoughts, comments, or questions? So when you read the paper, do you have any interesting insights as to what organizational development is and the challenges associated with the concept of organizational development? Any thoughts or questions before we kick start with the discussion?
You asked two questions. Can you clarify which one you want us to ask first? Answer first?
Any question? Any thoughts about the paper?
Any thoughts?
To get started with the discussion,
Very general question. Why do computer science major work?
questions or thoughts? I would like. I think thoughts are. Thoughts would be a better choice because we're not ready to answer questions yet. So, any thoughts on the paper before we start the discussion? Any interesting insights?
I like Conway's Law.
What about it in particular?
That someone thought of this.
Do you really think that Conway's law should have been made the foundation for the study conducted in this paper?
I think it's a good start.
Okay. So, alright, so Conway's law was a good foundation for his things for this study. As you know that the seed paper was by James C. Herbstep and Rebecca E. Grinter, and their paper was Architectures, Coordination and Distance, Conway's Law and Beyond. Their research was had the foundation on Conway's Law, and they basically built upon it. And they okay, so let's begin. So, what do you think? How would you define the theme of organizational development? What is organizational development? What does the phrase mean to you? What is organizational development? Any?
Split up work into several pieces and then work.
To split our work into separate pieces. Okay. Anyone else?
Something that involves a hierarchy.
Something that involves hierarchy. So,
Structure.
What comes into your minds when we say the word organization?
So carefully crafted stuff.
that with a systematic strategy instead of randomly generated stuff?
All right. So basically, we have two facets that we need to consider. First of all, the organization itself. For example, in this case, it was Lucent Technologies, and the project that they were going to design, the organization of that project. So we had two separate facets to think about. When he talked about splitting work into different categories or different chunks, it was, I think, he talked more about modularity, how a project should be split up into different chunks of work, and maybe those different chunks can be assigned to different teams, and all of those teams, they are not necessarily living on the same continent or in the same country, they can be different parts of the same country or in the same city. So, and when Kristen talked about hierarchy, the concept of hierarchy, I feel that she had the organization of the company which was developing the project at the back of her mind. So we have these two different facets to think about. The structure of the organization, which is designing something, which is developing the software, and the structure of the project itself. Like, how are they going to develop that software and come up with a product? And who will use that product? So there are many areas which need to be considered before we can design an organizational structure. And for that, the basis of our discussion today will be Conway's law. First of all, I would like to introduce our authors for this paper who have their research primarily focused on empirical software engineering. Who is James T. Herbstep? James T. Herbstep has been a member of the technical staff at Bell Labs, and he has involved in. Awesome. Okay. Can you hear me?
Now try.
Can you hear me?
Oh, you too.
Not
You don't know what you were. So before we kickstart our discussion on organizational development, we have two very interesting insights. One by Manny. He said that organization for him is the division of labor into different pieces, and for Kristen, it means hierarchy. And that is exactly what Conway's law talked about, which we're going to see in a little while. So about the authors. Who are the authors of our work? James T. Herbstep and Rebecca E. Grinter. James T. Herbstep has been working at the Bell Labs, and he led a Bell Labs research project to develop tools, practices, and organizational models to address the problems of globally distributed software engineering. So the problem that we're going to deal with is globally distributed software engineering. And these days, tools, practices, and models are being developed to make the process seamless and to achieve coordination among teams so that we can build our products on time and according to our expectations. Both of our authors, they have research backgrounds in CSCW and empirical software engineering. Their results have been focused on case studies and case studies in particular, especially the one conducted at Lucent Technologies, as you have read in the paper. And they're both, by education, they're both computer scientists, while James T. Herbstep has a PhD in psychology as well. from the University of Nebraska. So this is basically a brief introduction about the authors of our case study.
Can you see us on the icon?
Yes.
How come it isn't moving?
It was.
What?
Just hold the forward arrow.
Yeah.
So I'd like to put it in a position where I can see better.
There.
Well, sure. Thank you. Sorry.
So our problem statement today is quite simple. Basically, the key problem for organizational development is geographic distribution. When development teams they are geographically distributed, they face different kinds of problems related to communication and coordination. Why do you think are communication and coordination the most important factors while developing a software? And what do you think can be some other factors which are left behind, such as skill sets and the way teams are organized and split up into different work groups? Why is communication and coordination the main problem while developing a software?
Because people can be misunderstood, there's going to be miscommunication and stuff. And you have to set up protocols so that people understand each other.
Okay. So Jin thinks that people can be misunderstood, but if the people are working on different parts of the project, they have nothing to do with one another, then why is communication even necessary between them?
Because no project has a thing that's completely mutually exclusive.
Okay.
Like that's the problem with large OSs, right? You can claim that it's mutually exclusive, but it isn't. You have to interact, just like the people that are part of the team ultimately have to interact. So do the parts that they're engineering.
Uh-huh. And the authors, they have used the terms communication and coordination kind of interchangeably because they touch upon the same problem of working together while being on different continents. So how is communication and coordination actually different? How are they two different problems from one another? Why do you think communication and coordination are two different problems?
Well, they talk about in the paper that with coordination, you can communicate over email, and I can communicate with you at the water cooler, but in those two examples they gave, when I'm talking to you at the water cooler, other things come up because the speed of the communication is much faster. So other contexts come into play. So your coordination is discussed.
So based on this challenge of communication and of achieving communication and coordination, I feel that the most important problem while developing the software would be integration, when all these pieces are actually collected together, gathered together to make one final product. The author's case study, they basically did an empirical analysis, and they demonstrated that the most important thing maybe is not just the problems which we assume occur, but unanticipated, unpredictable problems which arise which are not documented before, but which arise in the middle of the project, and they're so important that sometimes they even stretch the project to the breaking point. It can no longer continue. So, designing effective project schedules does not necessarily guarantee that the project will eventually be successfully developed. And particularly based on this case study, the most crucial part was the integration part. And integration, as they say that modular design is necessary but not sufficient to avoid this fate. The integration was difficult in the first place because of the modular nature of the design. So I would like for you to think of alternate ways in which effective organizations can be developed apart from this, which can lead to better communication and coordination, in other words, more efficient systems, because I feel that efficiency in this case is measured in terms of effectiveness of communication and coordination. The more effective the coordination is, the more effective, the more it is predictable that the project will be successful in the end. And to achieve that coordination, the biggest challenge was geographic distribution. Yes, Chris?
This paper cites, like many problems, what happens with software engineering, that it doesn't come to fruition. And I've come from some of the projects I've worked on to learn in readings I've done.
Again, I would love personal experiences of different projects that you've been a part of before, and you can share the problems that arose as a result of those projects that you developed.
In some of the readings, they talk about the term buzzwords, that you should know that when someone says something, that's an immediate alarm. And I feel that you are following in the footsteps of this paper, and I have a problem with it, is you say that all you have to do is achieve effective communication. What is effective? That's so easy to claim that this is the only need, but just if I were to communicate with him, that ain't easy. Just from when I was given the presentation earlier, it's a continuous cycle, and we both knew that I was under a time constraint, so we are trying to get out our point, and we're willing to say the majority of what we're talking about, but we realize there's more to be talked about, but in this particular context, it wasn't the correct way to address it. So how is it that just being co-located geographically solves the majority of these nuanced problems, that when you're away and you're trying to use some kind of
We are actually
system?
going in the exact opposite direction of that. Being geographically co-located has its own set of problems, but being geographically distributed has even more problems. We're looking at it like that. And of course we are attempting to solve most of those problems, but the paper basically identifies those problems and talks about that.
Again, just to clarify though, you want to solve these geographically distributed problems and say, oh, the ideal situation is when you're not geographically separated. You just follow that effective communication model. And my question is what are some of these strengths? Because I don't feel this paper talks about what are these, like just one or two maybe, of these really good examples of what it means to have effective communication when you're located together.
Definitely. I feel that in the global age of today, developing software, organizational development is a big area is a big topic to be studied, and the authors, they have done a single case study based on recent technologies. There are so many different areas which can be, there are so many different companies which can be taken up for case studies. In the global age of today, it is very hard to have competitive projects on a single continent. You have to diversify your workforce. You have to employ people from different backgrounds, to have different sets of expertise, and you have to have a set of different perspectives. So it has become increasingly difficult today to achieve that kind of communication and coordination. So organizational development is becoming even more complicated. I think Uday has a point.
No, so how can you say that just because they're across continents, it makes a difference? Within the US itself, we have 3 or 4 time zones. So how can you say something else? Because, like if the statement you said was, you are located across different continents, and that is the problem. Within the same country, you can be at different locations, is that not?
Exactly. So if we are located in the same country, we have a certain set of problems. But if we are located in
why does the distance, whether it's 50 kilometers away or even like 1,000 kilometers away, why does it make difference?
Interesting. So this is one important question that should be answered. If one team is working in the United States and the other team is working in Germany, what kind of different problems they might face? They might have different. They might face challenges related to language,
No, they
time
all speak
zone.
English. Okay, assume an American living in Germany, then what?
So in the paper, I liked how they talked about between England and Germany, how it's 2 hours off. And because the social norm is to eat lunch, that complicates it. But I'll give you a positive that I know of when being in different time zones is a good thing. When the 35W bridge collapsed in Minnesota like 6, 7, 8 years ago, they did the coolest thing ever. And they had engineers working in Minnesota as well as in Australia, so that it's an exact 12 hours off.
When I worked, it was the same thing. So the distance isn't really the issue there.
I think it is, but it's in certain. So like, okay, you're one time zone away. We have a little problems because of the social.
Why do
You
you
get
think
6 hours
not
away.
an issue?
That was the whole point about, say, outsourcing for specific time zones. You push work onto a different time zone so that they can continue and you have a 24-hour clock.
I think it's the distance is tied to the time zone, is what I'm trying to say. So like there's certain ones that are problematic, 1, 2, and 3 hours. 6 hours is less problematic. 12 hours is even better. But then as you get back to the 18, 20, or back down to the 6 and less, right? But because I think the people, us as CSers, we expect to work 9 to 5.
Can I add something here? So these things about time zones are very well-known problems, and they are real. Language is a real problem, right? But what is the extra bit that organizational development adds that allows us to have a more precise and interesting analysis?
Different tools and organization models are being developed these days to offer a more seamless experience. One inspiration can be the paper that we studied earlier, using video as a means for informal communication. We can how can we achieve effective communication? I think we have spent enough time on this side.
Right. I don't want to interrupt your flow here, Amna, but I want to just point out that it's the structure of the organization and organizational development is adding. So in the situation that Chris is describing, he's describing that there really is no organization unless you consider there's not much organization. But what would happen if you had all the designers and the engineers in Germany, or You have the designers in America, but the engineers in Germany. That's a different structure than if you have vertically integrated teams in both places. And that's complicated.
Real
Sorry if I keep going.
Real quickly, yeah, then would be GarageBand. One of the reasons they were successful is their structure mimicked their product line. The designers in New York passed it to the designers in LA, who passed it to the manufacturers in China. And because the time zones aligned with their process and their organizational structure, that's one of the reasons they were extremely successful at rapid prototyping.
Okay. So a quick background on the topic of organizational development as demonstrated by the paper itself. Software engineering researchers, they've long argued that the architecture of a system is the most important part in coordinating development work. How a system is built up, the architecture of a system is the most important factor. However, based on, there are two different theories posed by Melvin Edward Conway, who was an early computer scientist, programmer, and hacker. He coined what is known as Conway's law. Conway's law, we will talk about it in detail in the next slide because it's basically the foundation of the paper. And Parnas's hypothesis, who was an early pioneer of software engineering, he came up with the concept of information hiding in modular programming, which is an important element of object-oriented programming today. So, what is Conway's law? Conway's law was presented by Melvin Edward Conway in his paper in 1968, which states that organizations which design systems are constrained to produce designs which are copies of the communication structures of these organizations. So what this means is that the structure of the organization is a mirror of the structure of the system which is being designed, mainly because the designers, they want to establish effective communication and coordination. Architectures, plans and processes. Architectures, plans and processes are the various coordination mechanisms. How do you think is architecture, how far do you think is architecture as an effective coordination mechanism while designing a system? Why is architecture important as compared to plans and processes? First, let's talk about that. How is the architecture of a system the most important factor in establishing an effective coordination among teams?
I'm getting a little.
For instance, let me give you an example.
Okay.
Like if we are designing, like in this case, in Lucent Technologies example, they have a certain team. It's working on one area of the project, and another team is working on the different area. For example, one team is working on the technical stuff, the other team is working on the graphics and stuff. So, how is architecture important here? And they say that in real world, there are many unpredicted events which occur, which must be accommodated, and for that we need to develop wise systems which can incorporate provisions in our design. We can maybe add a team, add a separate team which should just work upon coordinating the work between different teams and answer their questions, transfer queries from one team to another, and troubleshoot, basically. Because the paper, it basically talks about 3 different kinds of coordination mechanisms based on architectures, plans, and processes. they came up with, they ended up selecting one organization working on developing one product, and they based their hypotheses on that one product. So this is basically just focused on that. I really do not think that this might be the most effective way to form a hypothesis, because they should, because you can always add more case studies and do a comparative analysis and come up with better tools and models to achieve better coordination. So the case study was a company called Lucent Technologies. It was chosen for the case study for this topic. The Lucent Technologies department, which was chosen,